Yes, us. Hi, I'm a journalist. Actually, I'm a reporter. That means I go to places to tell people's stories to other people. I've been doing this job now for 15 years, and for the last 10 years, I've been doing it in conflict zones, in wars, so that makes me a war reporter. Now, I know there's lots of cliches and myths related to war reporters, some of them involving scarves and jackets with lots of pockets. And actually, when you come to think of it, scarves are very useful. You can use a scarf to cover your mouth or your eyes from bad fumes or smoke. You can use it to cover your hair when people don't want to see that part of you. You can use it as a towel if you get a chance to take a shower, or you can use it to mop blood out of a wound. So there is some truth to the cliches. But there's one cliche I'd like to dispel today, is that we war reporters are addicted to wars, that we're addicted to the front lines and all the uncertainties that go with it, the dangers, that we are adrenaline junkies. Let me tell you, no one enjoys being shot at, or bombed at, or watching people die, or filming people who have lost everything, their families, their houses. Only psychopaths would enjoy that, and we are not psychopaths. So why do we do it? Why do we go to places where everyone is fleeing from? Why do we risk it all to sometimes witness the worst human beings can do to other human beings? That's the wrong one. This is a screenshot of a report I filmed in Syria, in the city of Homs, in December 2011, 8 years ago. It's the dead body of a man lying in the street. You don't see anyone around him because in the buildings surrounding there were snipers positioned, and they were shooting at anyone who would get close to the dead body. So the neighbors and members of his family were hiding in the side streets and waiting for night to fall so that they could retrieve the dead body. The man had been taking part in the protest that had been ongoing in the city for a few months. He was actually an activist. He had been filming the protest so that people would know what was happening in his city. He had been arrested 13 days earlier by the security forces and had disappeared until his dead body was thrown in the streets of his neighborhood. This is one of the many terrible situations I reported in Homs. It was one of the strategies of terror the regime was using against the people who dared going to the streets, and that regime was trying to keep them from going back to the streets and protest. Against all odds, people were still protesting when I was there, and they were still going to the streets and crying slogans for reforms, for freedom, for justice, and facing a very brutal repression. They asked for the end of the regime, at one point the end of the dictatorship. At that time I spent 1 week in Homs, and I filmed many dead people, many desperate and scared, terrified people. I also filmed many determined people. They felt they had not much more to lose. The parts of the city where the protests were taking place were being besieged by the army. Security forces were arresting people in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day. You had snipers shooting at passers-by randomly, and you had tanks in those neighborhoods, so to make sure everyone understood who was in power. As a foreign journalist, I had to go illegally in the country. The regime was not giving out visa to foreign journalists. We were not welcome. They didn't want any witness. It was very terrifying, but very different to what I had reported on earlier that year in 2011. I had gone to report on the uprising in Libya, went to Benghazi before the NATO intervention. I went on to cover the war, the fall of Tripoli. I spent weeks in Sirte, the last stronghold of Gaddafi forces. I filmed Gaddafi's dead body, so I knew about violence, I knew about war, but what I saw and witnessed in Homs and reported on was different. It was a it was an incredible violence, and it was not an actual war yet. So why did I go to such places? Well, it was my job. I actually went to cover a protest, and they turned into war, and I just kept on doing my job. Of course, I could have said no. I had the freedom not to go, or at least not to return, to go home and to say I would never go back to those places. But I went on. As a reporter, as a woman reporter, I often get asked if it's more difficult and harder for a woman to be a reporter in wars, especially in the Middle East. And I always find it a bit funny as a question, because I've never been a man, so I cannot compare. I have nothing to compare it to. I wouldn't know. But what I know is that when terrorist groups and governments, regimes target journalists, they don't target gender. They target the journalist. They target the job we do. And the job we do is to bear witness and to dig for the truth, a reality they don't want to be told. They don't want their storytelling to be challenged. They don't want their power to be challenged. When I went to Homs, I didn't find a terrorist the regime was saying was there. I found people who were trying to survive. I found that it was the regime that was using terrorist strategy against its own people. The terrorists did come, and the foreign forces as well, but later. And this is another screenshot of a report I filmed in Syria as well. Many years later, in June 2017, at that time in the country, many wars were taking place, many different wars, and this was one of them. This was in the suburbs of Raqqa. The battle to retake Raqqa from the Islamic State had just had started. Actually, the Kurdish forces, who were the ally of the Western coalition on the ground, just a couple of days earlier had succeeded in getting into the city and had gained control of a few streets. I was on the roof of a house with a small groups of soldiers, and from far away they noticed they saw people fleeing from the city. So they took their binoculars and checked and looked and saw it was a group of people dressed in civilian clothes and holding a white flag. And nevertheless, they start shooting at them. So this is the rifle of the Kurdish soldier who was shooting at that group of civilians. Now, as a war reporter, you get to witness all kinds of crimes, all kinds of injustices. You get to report on sometimes the sides of the victims, sometimes the sides of the criminals. You don't actually, most of the time, decide which side of the war you're going to be reporting on. It is the access you get that decides for you, is how you can physically be in a place and stay there and report from them, that decides which side you're going to be reporting from. I wish I had been able to report from the side of the Syrian regime, but that was never possible. I wish I had been able to report from Raqqa when the Islamic State was controlling it, but that was not possible either. And I could have sneaked in, which I had done in other cases, but I would have probably, and certainly not, made it alive to send those reports, so that would have been pointless. I know what I've been telling you, what I've just shown you. There's not much to like in all that, and sometimes I do get discouraged, not only by the very, very dark side of humankind I get to see, not only by all the pain and the crimes and the injustices, but because it is a job, and I look at my industry. I see all the changes it's undergoing. I see the competition with social media. I see how foreign news are overlooked and there's less and less money for it. I see the growing distrust the public in Western countries has towards traditional media. I see also the impotence the public often feels when watching those kinds of reports. And that is the great uncertainty of this job. It's not about making it alive. I mean, of course, war reporters should stay alive. I never go do my job and think I'm going to die. That would be suicidal and absurd. I don't think I could go and do that job if I had that in mind. The great uncertainty is what happens next once the reports are broadcast, once the articles are published. And to be honest with you, nothing much happens in my experience. And that makes me very humble as a journalist, and sometimes it also makes me a bit upset, I must say. My reports did not keep people from being killed. It did not trigger an appropriate reaction from Western governments or from the United Nations to protect the weakest. Did not trigger either a great wave of solidarity among public opinions in Western countries where my reports were broadcast. So at the end, it didn't change much, right? What it changed is that we know, and it matters. And so when I get discouraged, I remind myself of what I'm certain of my certainties, of what I believe in. And what I believe in is that those lives matter. The dead matter too. That in Western countries I enjoy a great freedom of information, and I should make use of it. I believe that more than ever, in today's world that seems very uncertain and that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, I believe we should know what's happening beyond our borders to understand what's happening at home. And I believe in the virtues and in the necessity of journalism. Without journalists, without foreign correspondents, without war reporters who bear witness and check facts, bring out testimonies, and dig for the truth, sometimes at great cost, there would only be one story, and that would be the storytelling of the ones in power, the storytelling of the powerful, their propaganda, the PR, the public relations version of reality, the fake news. And for me, it's not enough. And I will continue to believe that for you, it's not enough either. Thank you. Oops.